I'm Chelsea from BingeEatingBreakthrough.com. One of the biggest barriers that I found to not being able to overcome my binge eating disorder was thinking that it was just another diet I could find, or a type of food I could eat, or maybe if I stopped eating so many carbs, or maybe if I tried this new way of eating where I only ate, had one free day a week or whatever, that I would somehow find a way to fix this craving and this need to eat a lot of food every single night. For me, I happen to eat at night. Other people, it can be a certain situation, maybe a few times a week, maybe every day. But what was it that was really triggering the craving? I just felt this compulsion to always eat way more than I wanted to, and typically, almost always, it was sweets at night. And I figured it was just adjusting to a new kind of diet, and maybe I was just freaking weak, and yet I know I'm a smart person, and for some reason I couldn't seem to break this powerful need to eat sugar every evening. And I didn't understand why other people around me could go on diets and lose weight and have all this great success, and I still couldn't break this compulsion to eat every night, and was just continuing to gain weight year after year after year. It was so infuriating. And the way that, I guess the big tipping point was when I shifted from looking at whether it was some sort of dietary adjustment or emotional soul searching. I mean, I went through a lot of the conventional therapy where they say that your eating behaviors are triggered by either past childhood trauma or some sort of emotion that you're trying to stifle, so you're eating food to suppress that emotion. All that emotional work, did it for years and didn't change a thing. Even when my life was great, like most of the time my life was pretty freaking good. I was traveling the world, starting my own business, in a great relationship. Like my life was pretty freaking great, and yet I still had this problem. That's why I knew it wasn't due to this emotion I was trying to avoid. I didn't feel like I was suppressing anything. I'd done a lot of self-development work. I understood the whole concept of having like a psychological driver, but for some reason the knowledge didn't help me break my habit. And so what I really found was that by studying the brain, when I started to get into studying the brain through marketing, that happens to be what my career is in. And so I started studying the psychology of how we experience products or buying. And then I started learning about the brain and how the brain works, and how we have sort of a lizard brain, that's our old brain, and then a neocortex, or our prefrontal brain, or our higher brain. And like these two brains work together, they work in tandem. And when they're working together in tandem, you have conscious decision. Your new brain gives you conscious thought. You can make choices. You're present in the moment. You can decide whether something's good for you or not and make a decision based on that, when your higher brain is controlling the situation. And when your animal brain is controlling the situation, that's your primal, what they sometimes call a lizard brain. It's the brain that we share with reptiles. It's the brain that evolved first in human beings. This brain sole purpose is to keep you alive, to help you survive. And so all of its triggers and all of its thoughts that it pumps into your head, and the chemicals that get released into your body triggered by this part of the brain, have to do with keeping you alive. And so with a combination of dieting and restricting and making one food good and one food bad and trying not to eat these foods, my brain was in survival mode, feeling like it was triggered, like I was keeping it, it was being restricted. So naturally, when something's restricted, what does it want to do? It wants to eat, to take advantage of the opportunities to eat when it does get food. And so I would be triggered by my repression or my suppression for my dieting and trying to control my behaviors. I would actually be triggering my brain to make it even harder to resist the urge to eat, because my survival brain had kicked in. And I didn't know this was all happening in my brain. I didn't understand why my thoughts were just like another person. It seemed like if somebody else stepped into my body and took over at certain times. Mostly it happened when I wasn't around people, when I was home alone or in a situation in the car or whatever. And I didn't understand why it seemed like another person stepped into my body and just took over. But when I started understanding how the brain worked and the chemical releases in the brain that happen triggered by hormones whenever we get under stress, or whenever our survival brain is intact, whenever all those processes are working the way they do, it sends thoughts into your head that seem like uncontrollable urges. And the automatic response is to follow the urge, right? Your lizard brain's trying to keep you alive. It thinks you're threatening it and it's starving, so it's going to try to eat. And so it's going to rationalize all day long why you should eat the rest of that ice cream and eat everything in sight because, God forbid, you don't have it available tomorrow, right? Since it's been restricted. And so it's sending all these urges and it's rationalizing it however it needs to make sure you eat to survive. And that, of course, gets messed up whenever you have consciousness that's trying to weigh in and trying to tell you not to eat certain things, and then you have your lizard brain that's telling you, oh my God, you got to eat that to survive or you're going to die. Those two thoughts in conflict cause stress, cause overload, and basically you just sort of cave in to relieve and suppress those urges. And caving in, just lost my microphone. Caving in is something that I did on a regular basis, every single day. And the more I started to cave in, the more I developed a habit, right? So the more my brain started to form around this habitual eating every evening. And as the brain gets used to a pattern, either a pattern of thoughts or a pattern of behavior, it starts to form neural connections. And those neural connections over time build and strengthen, and your brain becomes much more efficient. And that becomes a habit. So not only was I responding to a triggered lizard brain, now I was basically just having to deal with an ingrained habit. It wasn't so much that I was in survival mode. I was no longer restricting even, but I had formed a strong habit that had me continue to eat every single night. So with the awareness of what was happening to my brain, I started to understand how I could actually break down those thoughts and see the thoughts for what they were and recognize, oh, that's coming from my lizard brain that's triggered. I don't have to actually follow those thoughts. It's not true that I'm going to die, and having to get conscious and very present to the thoughts in my head so that I could take conscious action and make conscious choices around it. And that began to distance me from my reaction to those urges to binge every single evening. So by understanding how my brain worked and being able to actually put some space between my thoughts and my actions, I could start to develop a new habit over time. And so as that habit has become ingrained, that's what basically separated me from my binge eating habit and kept me from being in reactionary mode and caused me to eventually overcome the disorder. So I hope that's helpful for you. I don't know if you can relate to anything there that I've said. If it is helpful in any way, please visit my website, bingeeatingbreakthrough.com. I have 3 free videos where I basically talk about some strategies and techniques that I use to avoid binge eating, but then I go deeper into explaining the process of what I've just described here in my book, Binge Eating Breakthrough, at bingeeatingbreakthrough.com. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.